Okay, what I would like to cover in this video are some of the algebra tips that might be helpful when you start covering limits in Calc 1. So what you might see in a typical problem is I might have limit as x approaches 2 in front of this whole polynomial here. And what I will notice, and the one that's probably obvious to us, is if I put a 2 in this second denominator right here, I get 2 minus 2, which is 0, and dividing by 0 gives us problems. So what you will see in most of these is that you're going to want to figure out a way where you can algebraically combine these fractions together. And this technique that we should remember from prior algebra courses is using the lowest common denominator, or the any common denominator really will do. So what I want to do is see if I can see this first fraction in factored form. And so what I'm going to look at right now for us, because I'm only covering the idea of the algebra and not necessarily the calculus, is I'm not going to talk about the calculus as the limit as x approaches 2. We're going to pretend like that is not even a part of our problem for right now. That's something you'll deal with when you get to the actual calculus course. So I have the numerator 7 minus 4x, and then in my denominator I want to see if I can factor it. Well, there should be some sort of clue into how you think that denominator might be factored, because if it was helpful, then my common denominator would match. And so my common denominator would have a factor of x minus 2 in it, again, if the problem is being somewhat helpful. It doesn't mean that it has to. And so if I take the 2x squared minus 9x plus 10, this first quadratic in the denominator, and I want to factor that, well, I've got here, I'll use just guess and check, 2x and x multiply to be 2x squared, and then any factors of that 10 that will create this middle term here of this minus 9x. And another way to look at it is you also need factors of 20 if you're using the AC technique that combine or add to negative 9. And so I'll figure it out, but what I also want to do is try to kind of use what you're given. So maybe that factor is x minus 2, and if it is, this factor needs to be 2x minus 5, and then you can check to see if your middle term, there's minus 5x and there's minus 4x, and indeed that adds to negative 9x, so I know I factored it correctly. So if I rewrite my problem a little bit better here, I have 7 minus 4x, my two factors that I have found here, and then I'm adding that to the quantity x minus 3, which I'll put in parentheses. I'll show you why here in a second. And so I think my LCD is actually x minus 2 times the quantity 2x minus 5. And so I need both of these factors in each denominator, so I'm going to multiply this by 2x minus 5 over 2x minus 5. And now I do have common denominators. So this whole thing will then become one big fraction all over, that common denominator. And my numerator will become 7 minus 4x. And I will have to distribute to figure out what all of that becomes. So plus, that's 2x squared, if I'm just distributing here, minus 5x minus 6x plus 15. So if I keep kind of moving, then I have 7 and 15. If I'm going to combine like terms, is 22. I have a 2x squared, and minus 15x is in the middle here. Over my denominator. Okay, now remember the whole idea, if I can just bring the calculus back for 1 second here, right? If I'm looking the limit as x approaches 2 of this whole quantity, I still have this factor in here that I don't want in here. I don't want that x minus 2 in the denominator, because then I'm still dividing by 0. So when we're talking about the calculus, that's where that's going to kind of come from. So for right now, we're not dealing with this at all. This is not here. But just keep in mind, the whole point to doing this algebra is so that you can then factor your numerator and hopefully reduce it further, hopefully removing that discontinuity. And so I think this is going to factor 2x and x. Again, I'm going to sort of cheat to see if that's going to match. And again, it could have been the other factor, but I don't want to use the 5 when I have to multiply to 22. And so then I'll try this minus 11. So here I have minus 11x minus 4x does give me my middle term of that minus 15x, so I'm good all the way around. These reduce, and my final answer, if I were just adding those two polynomials together, looks something like so. And I also will just add, even though I think this is something that we are familiar with, this does not reduce, meaning this 2x and this 2x do not reduce, because again, you would need to factor to reduce. 2x cannot be factored out, therefore it cannot be reduced. I hope you find this helpful.